Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the annual meeting. Before we get underway this morning, I just want to once again thank local arrangements and the University of Washington and Penny and outgoing President Tim Kelly, incoming President outgoing President Tim and incoming President Bonnie Geldemacher, who is also the chair, as some of you know, of the Education Committee, because this has been a wonderful meeting as usual. And so, and as far as the last presentation yesterday, Kim Ositis, who talked about sleuthing, not stalking. Many of you have asked about extra handouts, and we do have a few extra handouts for that program. Sue Luddington has put some over there on the corner, if any of you are interested in some of the sites that she reviewed for you. Our next speaker got his BA at Loyola University in New Orleans, his JD at University of Idaho, and then, like so many law library directors before him, went to UW and got a library degree. And starting his law librarianship career as a reference librarian at Widener, he then moved on to Creighton, where he spent 10 years as a reference librarian and legal research instructor. In 2007, he was hired as associate director at Gonzaga University Law Library, ultimately becoming director in 2013. He has published numerous articles, many of which are about legal research, and now here today, this morning, to talk to us about getting our own articles in legal research published is Patrick Charles.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks for showing up here. It was about 15 minutes ago, and it was the longest 15 minutes. Is that right before you present there, where it just, time just stands still. You just want to throw up. So fortunately, I didn't do that. So thanks for showing up. I have to do a big shout out to Kim. That was a great presentation yesterday. I really enjoyed that. It was also a little bit disturbing, too. Disturbing on how much information's out there and disturbing on how much you know. And why do you do this? But that was a very good presentation. And actually a little bit of a segue into, you should write an article about this. And actually that's a LibGuide right there. So you could sort of take that thing and just make it into a whole bunch of other different things, which you probably have already done that too. Okay, so how to get published, and the most important thing here is with minimal effort here. I should also call this like low-hanging fruit here, because I'm a big believer in that. I have to say right off the bat, I'm not very smart. I'm not a good writer at all. I'm 10 pounds overweight, and my cholesterol is also really, really high. So why am I here? I want to talk about getting things published, and I'm kind of like a tick. I burrow in there a little bit, and then people are comfortable with me after that, and I sort of get my way sort of in a weird passive-aggressive sort of way. But I've also had a lot of other people to help me do that too. So I've glommed onto people who actually, well, it's kind of like that tick thing, a good host. And so I've been doing that for quite some time, and I want to tell you people how to do that too, if you're interested in having things published. I said I'm not very smart, and I said I'm not a very good writer. I'm also not like a thinker or anything like that. I tend to be very, very practical on things. I've been teaching legal research for about 17 years now. I'm a big fan and believer in secondary sources, and especially law review articles. But if you look at a lot of law review articles, they're kind of navel-gazing things. Nobody really cares, and they're probably not going to use those. At least they don't. No lawyers really care. Academics care because they have to get tenure and that sort of thing. So I'm one of the faculty advisors to the Gonzaga Law Review, and I've been pushing for years. Come on, we're not Harvard, we're not University of Washington. Little shout out there to University of Washington. We're Gonzaga, and why don't you write practical articles that actually people can use? That's a different presentation. But nonetheless, I'm kind of into, hey, somebody might read it and they might actually use it there. You can't really say that about some things coming out of the Yale Law Journal and some of those other things. Completely useless stuff other than, I guess they're advancing the law, but I don't care about that. But I want you guys, if you're so interested, to write practical articles there. And it's target-rich territory out there, especially if you look at the right publications. First, I want to ask a couple of questions. Who's actually written articles and book chapters and that sort of thing? Okay, who's interested in writing articles and that sort of thing? Okay, all those people who raise their hand first, just leave, because I'm going to focus on the second people there. Through the years, I've published a bunch of different things, but they've been in bar journals, or I did this in law school. I wasn't interested in the practice of law. I really wasn't interested in going to law school, but I ended up going. But I had a professor who I really, really liked, Mark Anderson, at the University of Idaho. And the guy's funny, he's engaging, he's interesting, and that sort of thing. I took every single class he had to offer, antitrust, because it was funny and engaging and that sort of thing. I'm really not sure where I'm going with this story here, but I just had to say that. Let's start with this. Okay, how to get published. This is our little roadmap here. Ideas for articles and books, then we're going to look at the types of periodicals, then we're going to deal with some of the meat of the thing there, contacting editors, dealing with publications and that sort of thing. And then also writing the article or book chapter or book or whatever. Ideas for articles. I have to step back a little bit and say, when I went to the University of Washington here for law librarianship, there was a couple of people like Penny and Mary Wisner who wrote a lot of stuff, and especially Mary Wisner, who, is she here? She's just written an enormous amount of stuff, and it's all practical type stuff, and I was like, wow, that's pretty good. So I kind of made a goal for myself of, I was going to have things published in sort of the big publications there. Law Library Journal, Legal Reference Services Quarterly, AALL Spectrum, some bar publications. I'm a member of the Oregon State Bar Association, so I was like, oh, I'm going to have the Oregon State Bar Bulletin there. And then I was thinking about maybe some other things that were out there too, like, you know, maybe be really ambitious and do a book chapter or something like that. So those were my goals. And like my wife says, you don't get fat overnight. It takes a long time to do that. So I was going to say, hey, I'll look at the long picture here and, you know, maybe one article a year there. And they don't have to be long articles. They don't have to be scholarly articles. They can be these little things in Spectrum or bar publications and that type of thing. And the other beautiful thing about it is most of these things, like the Northwest Lawyer, which is the Washington State Bar Association publication, or when I was in Nebraska, it was the Nebraska Lawyer. Boy, these are great titles here, huh? Nebraska Lawyer, Northwest Lawyer, that sort of thing. Oregon State Bar Bulletin. They come out 10 times a year or 12 times a year. They're dying to have articles there. So it's not like it's super competitive. And what was that? Oh yeah, WestPac News. And I'll talk about newsletters and that type of thing too. They're just dying to have those articles. And so it's really easy to get those things. You just contact them, tell them, hey, I have this idea for an article there, and boom, you're there. The other thing that I was interested in doing, and it's kind of a shame that this is just online now, but Perspectives, Teaching Legal Research and Writing. Who's familiar with this? Great, great publication there. I've had a bunch of articles published in this, mostly because I think Mary Hotchkiss felt sorry for me, and I was just hanging around a lot. And so much so that now Beth Edinger, I think, is the editor of it, and they asked me to be on the editorial board for that. And it's like, geez, the irony of that. So I'm supposed to go out there and sort of get people to get articles in this, and that's part of this whole presentation here is, hey, if you want an article, here's a good thing to do. They're online now. But these folks are just dying for articles there. As I said, I'm not very smart, I'm not a good writer, but I'm pretty good at coming up with ideas. And here are some really good ideas for articles. As I said, I'm really a practical person. Legal research subjects. I'm a reference librarian at heart there. Now I'm the director there, but you know, I'm a reference librarian, and the University of Washington trains good reference librarians. Didn't know anything about technical services, but you know, I'm a good reference librarian there. And I teach legal research. So I know a lot about that. And I taught first years for 10 years. It was their first semester. It was a standalone legal research class. So to sort of quote Bill Clinton there, I felt their pain. I understood what they were going through. And so legal research subjects, really good subjects, especially for you public services folks that are out there. But if you're technical services folks, which, you know, as the associate director and then now as the director there, I had to deal with technical services. So I learned a lot of things. And we weren't necessarily doing things correctly there. So I had to become up to speed on that sort of thing. So technical services, you just wait here. What have you done in your library? Well, that's the one for technical services right there. And you know, I remember Jonathan Franklin a few years ago saying, look at me, look what I did type of article. Well, those are useful sometimes. We just hired a reference librarian at Gonzaga, and I wanted to do it correctly there. So what did I do? I looked up articles on, you know, how to deal with bringing in some people and then making those bad phone calls that are like, I'm sorry, you didn't get the job. That's always difficult to do, but I actually found some articles on dealing with that and what are the right things to do. And deep down in my heart, I knew what the right thing to do was, but I just wanted some validation from some other things there. So that's a good subject sort of thing. You know, what you've done in your library. How about good or bad library practices? I had the benefit of working at Creighton for 10 years, and it was a well-run operation. Since then, I've had some very good directors, and now that I'm the director, but I see that some other libraries aren't necessarily as well-run as some. Articles about pointing out the good things that you do or you've experienced, you can kind of be nameless on the whole thing, those are good fodder for articles there. You can think of things. This is the thing that I've sort of gotten a little into, and it's sort of my own geeky librarian interest here. Library or legal history subjects there. I had something published in the Spectrum that was like 10 obsolete legal research tools, and one of them was that National Reporter System Blue Book. We were also talking about in it Mosaic. Remember the Mosaic browser? Yeah, oh, that's right. Ooh, the internet, you know, pictures and that type of thing. You know, people like to look at that. And it was funny because Penny and I were talking about this beforehand. And she didn't think that too many people were interested in it. And I disagreed. I thought a lot of people were interested in that. I actually got people who sent me letters and emails. I actually had a letter, like a letter. The Postal Service, somebody said, I really enjoyed that. Okay. And then the other thing that I did recently, which actually started out as a library display. I was doing some research on some law reviews, and I stumbled upon some old law reviews that the publishers used to have advertisements in them. And this was in the 30s and 40s, mostly the 40s. And I'm a big World War II history buff. I don't dress up in that stuff, but yeah, that wouldn't be good. But I'm really interested in that type of thing. And I noticed that they were World War II legal themes in the legal publishing themes, which was sort of weird. But that was when, you know, total war and the war effort and the home front and all that sort of stuff. So I got a lot of these images actually off of Hein Online because they were a little bit better there. And then I printed them out and I put them up as a display there. And then I thought, well, heck, why don't I just put something, you know, an article on it. Posted it on SSRN, and then the next thing I know, I went to AALL Spectrum online, and they posted it there. You know, is it advancing, you know, legal research or the academy or anything? No, it isn't. It was more of a vanity type thing on my part. But, you know, that's kind of interesting, and that's a good idea. Especially if you sort of struggle with things, that's a good way to sort of dip your toe in the water there, and then you can go from there and do things that are a little bit more substantive and maybe even, dare I say, scholarly there. Which kind of leads us to, you know, our legal publishers here. I'm in that rarefied air as a director there, so budgets and all that sort of thing. I love the publishers, But I also hate the publishers too, especially when it comes to billing and all that sort of thing and how much things cost, and sometimes they're a little too expensive there. We can be nice, but we could also advocate, let's do some better practices on these. And I know that AALL does that in regards to crib and that sort of thing. But it's not a bad idea to sort of go on some of these publications here and say, hey, I really like that. I like that new Bloomberg product, or I like that new Walters Kluwer product or something like that. But you can also say, does it have to cost so much? But those are some different ideas that you can kind of come up with. Types of periodicals. I kind of talked about this. We've got law library publications, and that list, that sort of bucket list I had for my career, there's a lot that's out there. Law Library Journal and Legal Reference Services Quarterly, they tend to be a little more scholarly there. You got to have footnotes and that sort of thing, and they tend to be pretty long. And it takes a time investment and that sort of thing. Fortunately, they're peer edited, so you don't necessarily have to deal with student editors on those whole things. But nonetheless, those are the law library publications. The lighter, less scholarly things tend to be, AALL Spectrum, then also Spectrum Online, newsletters that are out there too. And newsletters are a good way of sort of, as I said, dipping your toe in the water and kind of getting started on some of those things. Legal research and writing publications, as I said, there's perspectives there. What's that one for the legal writing one? It's Scribner or something like that. One of the, Scribe, that's it, bingo, thank you. That's a pretty good one because, the relationship between librarians and legal writing and that sort of thing. A little bit more ambitious, books and book chapters. When I was at Creighton, there was a reference librarian there that I replaced, a wonderful guy named Paul Hill. And Paul he retired and he was a little bit older, but he was a bicycle enthusiast, and he raced bikes. He's 65 years old and he's racing bikes and doing all that sort of stuff. And he got involved with this publisher from Tucson, Arizona called Lawyers and Judges Press. It's a real small press. And they actually started out selling for personal injury lawyers, those sort of skeletons and exhibits and that sort of thing. And then they morphed into litigation-oriented materials. And Paul Hill wrote a book about bicycle accident reconstruction. And they had an engineer do the first half of the book. And then Paul Hill, the reference librarian, what he would do is he'd do a survey of all the case law about bicycle accidents and all sorts of things like that. Well, Paul retired, so he said, hey, Pat, maybe you should write some stuff for lawyers and judges. And, I gave it a shot. Now, that ended up a disaster. It's sort of like the Hindenburg there. And I ended up not doing it. But I know that Kay Andrus, the director there now, he's been writing for them. So if you're ambitious like that, there's a lot of books and book chapters to do. Just find all the different publishers that are out there. And one thing that I sort of have in the back of my pocket that I want to do if I had the time, and I really shouldn't say this because somebody's going to steal my idea and then take, money out or food out of the mouths of my children there. Everybody see right there for West Academic? There's the short and happy guides. Anybody familiar with those things? Actually should walk over. Here they are. They're brand new. And I'm not plugging for them, by the way. But they have one, this is Short and Happy Guide to Being a Law Student. They have one for property law. They have one for con law. They have for all the first year ones. They don't have a legal research one. And I've actually contacted them about it. And I said, I'm interested in doing this. And they keep contacting me back, and I keep blowing them off. But I really want to do this. I don't want anybody to steal my idea, but what am I going to do about it if somebody steals my idea? We also have a professor at Gonzaga, Scott Burnham's the guy's name. And he's a UCC guy, sales guy, and that sort of thing. He's written those Glannon guides, some of those study aids. But what he did for contracts was he did one of those, an idiot's guide or a dummy's guide or whatever those things for contract law. And that's brilliant because, you know, those are everywhere. But for legal materials, it's like, oh, wow, there's kind of a growth market there. And they sell a lot of books. He told me how much money he made off that thing. More than his treatises that he writes, if you can believe that. So there's a lot of target-rich area here for books. I was also talking to somebody at Gonzaga who's an editor for Matthew Bender, and she's been trying to get people to write articles for her, or chapters for her treatise. Now, it tends to be really substantive, and I don't necessarily think it's something that, or maybe it is for law librarians to do that type of thing, but I mean, she's jonesing for people to write chapters for her. So it's not as hard as you think. And then the last one are law reviews and legal periodicals, like, you know, University of Washington Law Review or, you know, the FSU Law Review, that sort of thing. Those are a little bit harder to get sort of legal research subjects in there, but they do publish those types of things. And if you put something together that's really good, you know, they'll publish those things. Also, you got to think, when I was in law school, there was like 180 ABA accredited law schools. Now there's like 210 or something like that. They've all got journals. Some have more than one. They need articles too. So, you know, if you want to get the Harvard Law Review, well, good luck with that. But sort of some of your, I shouldn't say the word lesser, but some of the other ones out there, you know, try it. What's the worst that could happen? They could say no. The best that could happen is, oh yeah, we're going to publish that for you there. And then you'll go through the whole editorial process and that type of thing. So those are the different types of periodicals or books that you can go through. The next step in the process, contacting editors or publishers or that type of thing. If you're going the non-law review legal journal route, it's pretty easy there. On most of these publications here, especially the non-scholarly ones, you know, just read the first few pages there, the publication requirements and guidelines there. What I've done, though, is I read through that, and then I'll send them an email, especially the folks at the Northwest Lawyer or the Washington State Bar Association publication. And I've had like 3 or 4 articles for that. And I just said, hey, I got a great idea for this thing. What do you think? And they either give you the green light or they say, no, we don't want to do that. Now, it'll take a few months because, you know, they put everything together. So if you contact them in October, it's probably going to be somewhere in March that it's going to get published. But, you know, give them a buzz and shoot them an email and see what they say about that whole thing. Working with them. I've had some really good experiences working with publishers and editors, and I've had some really bad experiences. Some are real hands-on and do a good job. Some are real hands-off and do a good job, and some are just really bad. And I've dealt with those, and I'm not going to name any names on those types of things. You know, contact them, see what they say, work with them. My opinion about doing these things, if they have suggestions, I'm going to trust them on that. I'm not thin-skinned about things. If people have red ink all over things, well then fine. You know, I don't take it personally. As I said, I'm not a very good writer, so I need all the help I can get there. Writing the article and other thoughts there. If you suffer from writer's block, you know, this too shall pass. Especially if you have a deadline there. That's a very good motivator there. And also fear of failure is a pretty good motivator. Some of the little tips and tricks that I have, find someone, glom onto someone who's a good editor. I've had, you know, people I work with, and my wife, who was an English major, she looks at everything. And she's vicious, partly because it's me. But she will go after things with a fiery red pen, and that's okay. I've also had the benefit, and I feel like I'm name dropping here, but Linda Kawaguchi has read every bad thought that I've had in regards to things, and I've given her some crap too through the years. But she's always cleaned it up for me. When I started writing articles at Creighton, I had a student who was the editor of the Law Review, and he was roughly my age. He was in the service before, and then he went to law school. And he was a really good guy, had a great sense of humor, and I became friends with him. And he was a real gunner, and he worked for a pretty good law firm in Omaha, and he volunteered for everything. And the Nebraska lawyer has a guest editor every issue. And he wanted to, get his name out there and do all that sort of thing. Well, as the guest editor, he had to go out and get people to write articles. So he had to go out there and, churn it up there. And he always went to me, so that was my in. And I think I wrote like 8 different articles, which was really nice. And also he edited the heck out of them too, so he made them look presentable and that type of thing. If you can get someone like that, then you're in. You're golden right there. And then good things happen after that, which, as I said, Mary Hotchkiss just felt sorry for me on a lot of those perspective articles. So she just kind of cleaned them up, and boom, I got like 3 or 4 there. Some of the other things that I've done, another trick is you can write articles that are the gift that keep on giving. I got interested in jury verdicts and settlement information like LRP and that type of thing, and Northwest jury verdicts and some of those things. And in fact, in Omaha, I wasn't paid that much, so I moonlighted for that LRP company where I was the person who got all the jury verdicts and settlement information for Douglas County, Nebraska, which is Omaha there. And they paid $25 a verdict there, and that's how I sent my kids to Catholic elementary school. So it was all on the back of personal injury verdicts and employment verdicts there. But that's a great article because, attorneys want to know about that stuff. It's useful information, especially for those employment law attorneys and personal injury attorneys, both on the plaintiff side and the insurance defense side. They want to know how much something's worth. Somebody loses a hand, what's a jury in Omaha, Nebraska as opposed to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and there's a big difference. So I wrote one for the Nebraska lawyer on personal injury, and that turned into one on employment law. And then when I moved to Washington, I did one for Washington State. And then I did one for Idaho and the Idaho Advocate. And then I did one for the Oregon State Bar Bulletin there. It was like the loaves and fishes thing there. It just kept going. And the beautiful thing about it was print resources and electronic resources. Now, a lot of those jury publishers, they're kind of mom and pop operations there, and they keep getting bought up. So you write an article, and it's essentially time-bombed. In 2 years, it's obsolete. So you got to write a new article there. It's the gift that keeps on giving there. Another good article idea, legislative history. We had that great presentation by all those folks from BYU and Utah and that sort of thing, where it said young associates don't know anything about legislative history. Well, write an article about legislative history, how to compile legislative history in your state. I've done that for Nebraska. I think I did one for Washington. It's easy peasy right there. You should get those all the time. New databases that come out, what they have. You can do those types of things. So they're pretty easy right there. The next thing, I got off on a little tangent there, but I got to fill up 45, 50 minutes, I guess. Proofreading. This is the thing I struggle with the most. It is my cross to bear, as we Catholics say. If I have a good editor, they usually catch that thing, but I start writing things and I know about it and I start seeing mirages and it's like, oh yeah, that's what that means. But then I let things sit, marinate for a little while, and then I come back to them and I read them out loud actually. And that's when I catch things. But just these little sort of things can make or break you, because I've dealt with some editors at some publications, they don't read stuff, which is appalling. But I've had some situations where things have blown up on me. And I don't like that because you just don't look good there. So proofreading is important. The next thing, networking. As I said, you keep going back and doing things and then, people read about, oh yeah, like they know what they're doing there. And that leads to other things. So you can build your way up on some of those things. That's how I think I got that Perspectives editorial board thing. They just were tired of me hanging around, that it's like, you might as well join the whole thing. The other thing is be practical about your articles there. Have a practical subject. If you're a scholarly type person, okay, that's fine. I'm not that breedy cat right there. That doesn't work for me. I'm really quite practical, as I said. And I also look at it like, hey, if I publish something in the Nebraska Lawyer or the Oregon Bar Bulletin, chances are I'm going to have a lot more people reading this than if I had it published in a law review or something like that. It's kind of sad to say that, but these are quick and easy type things, and people do read them. Now they might say, oh, that's terrible, but you know, they're a quick and easy read. It's kind of like People magazine. It's, oh yeah, I can go through that pretty quickly there. Some of the other things. I've actually posted a bunch of things on SSRN. I'm sure you can do that. You get a little bit of buzz and you get some hits there. I've also had a couple of like blogs kind of say, oh wow, here's this good article, and then you see like, you get an avalanche of a bunch of things there. Now for SSRN, I like it. I like it as a legal researcher because you can find a bunch of free articles there and they're in PDF. I know a lot of professors who sort of have it as a fetish there, how many hits they got and how many downloads and that type of thing. I don't really care too much about that. But it is one way of getting things out. And then also when it's accepted for publication, you can flip it over there and say, oh yeah, it's in the Harvard Law Review or whatever, or the AALL Spectrum. It's just getting you a little bit more exposure on the whole thing. I haven't, posted on anything else there. There was a time when I had things listed on my faculty page where I had links to articles, but I just stopped doing that because I just stopped caring in regards to those. I thought it had enough exposure out there on some of the other things that are there. Any questions? I know I'm sort of a little short on this whole thing, but yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can you wait for a mic?
Oh.
Oh, got one close? Good. Is it green? Hello?
I don't hear you.
No, we don't hear you yet. Maybe you can just repeat the question until we...
I will do that.
Okay. Thanks.
Quick question. What about the idea of writing, I guess like from the flip side of what you've been talking about, just getting some stuff written. We back up. Sometimes the way to get out of writer's block is you just write something. Just whatever comes to mind, because it's a lot easier to look at it as an editor, a week or so later. And so it can just get you, putting stuff down on the page. What about the idea of, doing something like that, and then just, the fact that there are so many publications so hungry for content? Have you ever gone about it that way, where you just get something written enough that you can actually sort of start shopping it, maybe not even in some of the publications that you're talking about, but just looking at libraries generally, because then the universe just opens up, and it's probably still something that has cachet in our profession, to be in just anything in the library world. Have you had experience doing it that way, as opposed to calling the editor and sort of talking with them about a possible idea that you might turn into a deadline and then an article?
I'm supposed to repeat that question.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Your mic works.
Overcoming writer's block and just writing things sort of stream of consciousness there to sort of boil that down a little bit. And actually, that's a good idea. And I've done that too, because I have struggled with putting together ideas. And that's where my wife and other people have sort of come in. I'll just write it, and it's not good. Sort of what I was saying earlier, it marinates a little bit there. And then I go back to it, and it's like, well, I can work with this. I could put this back together. I remember one professor talking about SSRN. It's the database of half-baked ideas. You just keep adding to it, and eventually it works out pretty well. That's actually a really good strategy. And, ultimately it kind of goes back to, why are we doing this? Is it to share knowledge? Yeah, we're librarians, for goodness sakes. We want to show people how to do things. It's kind of like, we're not necessarily going to do the fishing for you, but we'll teach you how to fish. And we'll also provide manuals on how to fish and that type of thing. So we're in there in sharing knowledge. Some people, I'm on sort of a weird long-term contract, tenure track type thing. Writing's not a requirement for me, although I have all the criteria of professional development and that type of thing. I just like writing. So I've had to do it for, my survival. I've also done it for resume padding too. Now that's a little bit crass, but we are getting paid for this, so we have to do things that way. Some of it is for prestige, and I've worked with a lot of people who have a much better pedigree than I do in regards to where I went to school. And that type of thing. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder in regards to things, and it's like, well, I'm not that bright, but I think I could do that. Sometimes it's ended up in failure, but other times it's been like, oh, I'll take that as a win there. So sometimes we do it for showing off too. But ultimately, back to yours, which I know what you were saying there. Sometimes you just write things there. And then you can pick up the pieces in regards to it and go, okay, I've gotten over this writer's block here, and then I actually have something to work with, and I can sort of resurrect that or resuscitate it there, and you actually have a pretty good thing to work with there. The other thing that I've sort of learned from this whole thing is I actually know quite a bit. I might not have the confidence, but I remember I had to do something, and about 6 months ago I wrote it, and then I forgot about it. And then I was doing Google Desktop, and I found this document, and I'm like, hey, wow, that's a great thing right there. I can't believe I wrote that. It was so good there. But coming back to things is actually a pretty good idea. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes.
Have you ever worked with a co-author? And what do you think would be the positive and negatives of working with a co-author? I have been working with a co-author, and his expectations of me are rarely met in terms of time frame.
That's a good question. I have worked with co-authors. I've worked with co-authors on little articles, and I worked with a co-author on, actually co-authors on, in Nebraska, at Creighton, we wrote for Mickey's LexisNexis, the Legal Research Guide to Nebraska. And it was Ann Kitchell, Kay Andrus, Troy Johnson, and then myself, and we divided it up into, I had, I think, the Constitution and statutory codes, and then we farmed it out to secondary and all that sort of thing. So I've dealt with co-authors there, and then I've also dealt with, as I said, co-authors in sort of shorter things. I think I've been extremely fortunate, knock on wood, that I've dealt with people who sort of thought like I did. In the back there, Linda and I have a bunch of articles. We have a weird relationship. We've known each other for a long, long period of time. She got me involved. We went to law school together. She got me involved in law librarianship. She said, hey, why don't you do this? I'm like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, my wife, I was dating, well, I was stalking, actually sleuthing is a better word. And Linda just said, for God's sakes, just ask her out. So she's responsible for that. She's also responsible for my current job, too. When she got the directorship at Gonzaga, she needed an associate director and called me up. So those three things. And then when she left as the director, she gave me her hot tub, too. So, so a lot of things that are important in my life. But we're weirdly like brother and sister in regards to things. And we actually think alike. And it's been very easy working with her on that, and then also all those people I worked with at Creighton. It was very easy working with them. I've had a couple of other experiences where it wasn't so good. And stronger personalities and egos, that's real hard to do. I'm generally pretty open to suggestions on things, so if it was somebody slighted me or like, oh, you're definitely on the disadvantage. The guy who did the keynote yesterday, which was very entertaining and very informative, he was talking about, who goes first on an article. And I think there's like 4 Big Bang episodes about that. But in any event, to me, that's not a big deal. I don't care. But I can, so I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, I can take that. But I can see situations, and I've sort of bumped up against it a little bit. But you just got to work through it. One thing nice about being law librarians is we're open to suggestions there. Law professors, maybe not so much. So a little different in regards to that. But that's a good question. I hope that answered that. I'm glad you're asking questions.
Another source I could suggest for writing is many of us, at least a few times, if not several times in our career, will end up giving presentations at conferences such as this, AALL, Cali, etc. And when you become familiar enough with the topic that you're presenting on it, quite often you can expand that into an article in some place. Corinne's work on legal research, no doubt, will take of attorneys could be turned, well, once they're done with whatever their next survey is, will turn into an article. I expect to see Patrick's write-up of this session turn into an article in Spectrum next year. So think about things that you're already working on, and you can just, I realize it's not the same as long form. Lord knows I can't write long form without having a brilliant inspiration for it. Even then it doesn't look that good. But think about things you're already doing in other formats and turning them into written projects.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, that's a great point on it, and that's why that's an article right there on the sleuthing, and actually all of these programs, with the exception of this one because it's just so bad, are articles that you can put together. But what I'm going to put together, we actually had a book thief at our university, and thank God it wasn't the law library where the guy hit it a lot, but it was the undergraduate library. But the law library was involved in the whole thing. This guy was a former student who took a lot of books. A lot of books. We recovered 1,500 books that were worth over $140,000. That's a lot. He had done this over a long period of time, but come to find out, that actually happens quite a bit. And there was an East Coast law school that recently had that problem, and my dean, on the dean's list there, and my dean got it, and this person said, has anybody ever had an experience with book thieves? If you could, contact me off list. And my dean contacted her and said, talk to my library director. It's an interesting subject. We recovered all those books, by the way. But it was a really interesting thing, and I think that happens quite a bit. So, experiences that you come across. Now, for some people, I hesitated to say how much money we lost because that's not a good reflection on, my institution there. But, hey, if somebody can learn from this and do that we have an obligation to say that too, warts and all on that. But maybe I can remain anonymous or finesse it that way. But that's a great point there. There's a lot of things. It's easy to come up with ideas to write articles. You got a question?
So feedback from readers, have you gotten a lot? And you mentioned that there were some that blew up, some articles. Was that in the feedback realm or?
Yeah, that was in the feedback realm, and I really don't want to get into that one. But it does happen. Actually,
the fears that keep people from writing, I think.
Let me talk about the good ones first. It's not like I get a lot of them, but I think through the years and what I've written, like 25 big and little things. I think I've gotten about 15 comments through the years, and I keep them. And I put them up on the board in my office, because when I'm having a bad day, it's like, well, at least somebody likes me, other than the dog. And it's gratifying to hear that. It makes it worth it. But, you know, it's not like, yeah, it's not like, you know, the Justin Bieber Twitter page where he's got 100,000 followers or anything like that. But you do get that. The negative things, I've had a few. There's a lot of attorneys who, I don't know if they're bored or what, but they'll look through a publication and they'll pick out every little substantive flaw in it, which is a good thing. I mean, it really is. But I had some guy send something to me about Nebraska legislative history that, yeah, I'm big enough to admit I should have worded it differently. I was a little too broad and general on some things there. And actually, he sent me a letter, and I think he did a letter to the editor, too. But I was okay with that. That's fine. I mean, you're putting ideas out there, and, you know, people are, you know, going after them. It's like, yeah, that made me a better writer the next time. But yeah, you get good and bad, but it's not like you're going to get an overwhelming amount of comments and that type of thing.
Can I ask a quick question or
Yes.
make a comment? So one thing I'd really like, two places that I think law librarians need to publish all the time. And one of them is your alumni publications.
Yes.
And I look at those, we get a lot of them in our library, and I look at them really regularly, and I'm just appalled at how rarely you see anything written by or about librarians. So that's one place. And then I just want to second your comment about bar journals, because if you stop to think about the number of lawyers that those suckers go to and the audience that you could reach, and not just think about it in the, you know, what do I have to share that I can help a lawyer or a law firm or the practice of law move forward, but think about it also as promoting the profession.
Absolutely.
And promoting us, right? So I don't care what the subject matter is, I love to see articles that are written by librarians, and I just think more of us need to take that on as a professional responsibility, right? Because as you said, most of these publications are dying to get content, and there are county, you know, we've got a county bar bulletin here in King County that's just a newspaper, but the Rita Dermody writes a piece, and Kim often has pieces in there all the time, and I just think that, you know, those are people we need to connect with, and they need to know that we exist, and that's just, it's such an easy way to do that. I really want to encourage people to really think about that.
I agree with that, and I'll get to you in a second, Linda. The last thing in the Northwest Lawyer was they do a top 10, and it's like, man, that's an easy article. That takes a day to do those types of things. So if your state bar publication does one of those, well, do that for goodness sakes. And if they don't have a regular top 10 thing, say, I got an idea for a top 10, you know, and you're David Letterman there. So it's pretty easy to do that type of thing. But that is where I got my start on these things. So yeah, Penny's right on it. Linda.
This is something I just learned last week, so I wanted to share it. Better that you write the articles yourselves that you want to write instead of somebody else contacting you and wanting to interview you for, say, a blog posting, because that's what happened to me, and I didn't know what the blog posting, what the point was supposed to be, but she just asked me some what I thought were strange questions, so I answered them, and then she wrote the article and posted it, and one of the deans at my law school just like went into this huge tirade about how awful the article was and take it down, it needs to be rewritten, and I completely agreed. It was horrible. It was a terrible article, from word choice, sentence structure, content, tone, organization. It was unbearable to look at, but I felt like, well, I guess, you know, it's her writing and her boss should be editing her work. I don't want to barge in. But it went on for a good 7 days of back and forth and rewriting every single paragraph. And then, well, why don't you ask Linda for a quote on this? And if I just written the damn thing myself, it would have been so much smoother. So that's a lesson, I think.
I've got 2 comments on that. Did I tell you she's a pretty good editor in regards to things there? And she's vicious too about it. So she'll clean up things very nicely on that. The other comment I want to make on that is I didn't talk about blogs or Twitter or any of that sort of stuff because I'm just not interested. I know I sound like an old man there. This internet thing is going to go away. That sort of thing. But that's something you can do. The problem with starting your own blog or any of that sort of stuff, man, that's an investment. That's like a mortgage. You got it for a long time. And there's a lot of things that are out there that, you know, they don't last more than 6 months. Now, guest blogging is one thing, but, you know, I'd rather do something a little more traditional this way. And, you know, if it's part of, you know, tenure or any of those types of things, those are really looked down upon, although I think things are changing significantly now in regards to it. And don't even get me started with Twitter. I don't understand it. 120, 40 characters. I don't like that. So, do you have a question?
No, I have a suggestion, and that is to consider non-law library publications. Recently, I wrote an article in a 50-state survey of laws that impacted public library policies about bringing guns into the library. And the law library journals and publications wouldn't take it because it wasn't law library enough. So I published in the Public Library Quarterly, which happens to be peer-reviewed, so it works for tenure. And I think it was more of a practical article that way. It certainly reached the audience I was trying to get, although there are public law libraries. And the ALA online magazine editor picked it up and interviewed me for an article she wrote. So another way to get your research out there.
That's a great point. And in fact, early in my career, I was asked to do a presentation at a state library association. And it was an easy subject of, I hated the name, Where the Secret Laws Are. But it was essentially geared toward, you know, I wore a tinfoil hat or something like that. But it was about, it was aimed at public libraries and public reference librarians on, you know, basic sort of civic stuff and finding work product from the 3 branches of government on a state level and a federal level. And I've actually turned that into 2 different programs, 14 years apart, and they just ate it up. That could easily be translated into an article there, and I think you're right about that. So non-law library and non-legal too, which was your point there. Historical sort of society publications too, those are pretty good, especially when you're getting into those areas. Another article that, or thing that's kind of the crown jewel, the ABA journal. It's like, man, I wouldn't mind doing that. That'd be a pretty good trophy. Another one is, it's the Student Lawyer, which I think is published by the ABA, and there's also this National Jurist, the magazine for law students. I'm not sure if they are together or something like that, but no?
Student Lawyers from the section of legal education.
Okay.
ABA, or some division of it, or young lawyer division or something.
They were going through, they had some general editor problems there. And
that's a Crittenden publication, and over the years, I haven't looked at several issues, their editorial quality has not been especially good.
But look, it's a good starter house, you know, 800 square feet, you know, that type of thing.
Exactly,
So, and as Penny said there,
and it's their staff writing that I take issue with, not the contributions to it.
But it's a good way. I mean, it's like, hey, you know, you're in law school. You know, there are librarians there, and they're not just shushing and making sure everything's tidy there. But yeah, that's thanks for that input. Any others? Oh yeah, no.
Where do you find the time?
I don't do other things. No, I procrastinate and I go in on the weekends. Yeah, that's hard. That goes back to my whole thing on the short and happy guide thing. I mean, I would love to do that. That's just such an investment of time. I also have another article that I'm working on. I think I'm in year 4 of it. So it's hard. That's why, these shorter ones are easier to do. And they're also my release from, I don't want to deal with that issue that's going to take me forever and probably won't come out as a good resolution. This is something that I can accomplish. But I'm sort of joking on that, but you're correct. When I was a reference librarian, I had the time to do that. Now, not so much, but I should delegate a little bit more. But as I was talking about, we just hired a new reference librarian, and I would like to co-author with her on some stuff because I want to help her in the profession too. And I want to get her experience and resume and all that sort of stuff up and kind of mentor her and introduce her to that sort of thing. So that's a way to find a little bit of time on it. But yeah, you're right. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I do like to go home sometimes. Yes?
You mentioned you should contact publishers, the editors, before you start an article. Mm-hmm. How receptive do you find them if you have a couple ideas for an article to bouncing ideas for an article off them?
They've been very receptive, from the bar publications to Spectrum to it's been a joy dealing with them. Is there a Lexus rep here? Years ago, it was a little bit harder dealing with Matthew Bender and Lexus when they were going through all that sort of get together there. I don't mean to. That was mean of me. I shouldn't have done that. But they were more on deadlines on things. So, and they're making money. They're in the business of doing that. So deadlines are a little bit harder there. Whereas the bar publications, they're more of a labor of love type thing. So, we're a little bit more, we're academic, we're a little more comfortable with that type of thing, whereas these guys, they have to make the payroll and do all that sort of stuff. So it was a little bit harder with them. Yes?
Well, I'm not a librarian, so I'm kind of curious to know, is the reward, is it by having something published, or are you paid for it?
I'm just curious in all these articles.
Her question was, what's the reward here? Is it personal satisfaction? Is it money? It's a combination. There's some law schools, although it's a little bit harder these days. You can get a grant to write during the summertime. Now, I'm on a 12-month contract. I'm working in the summertime. I also love it when students are like, well, what are you going to do this summer? Work. Every day. So there's some money in regards to it, and some, depending on the school, some of the grants are quite generous. I was talking to some people in Texas, at some private schools in Dallas, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a lot of money there. But generally, it's personal satisfaction. We're librarians. It's kind of like, I'm not going to missions to Mars or anything like that. So it's not like I'm an adrenaline junkie or anything like that. But there's some satisfaction in just doing it. Yes?
Well, I simply have a comment piggybacking to the question we had, before this one, regarding on contacting editors. Mm-hmm. I just want to make a comment and share my personal experience. Recently had experience with Journal of Legal Education. I'm not quite sure whether you've
that's an AALS publication.
Yeah, it's a pretty prestigious publication, but I don't think it really works if you send in your proposal or your idea over to the editorial board. Sometimes you don't really get a very good feedback from them, or sometimes you rarely get a feedback from them. So just my thinking, toward that question is more like it depends. Sometimes with the law review article, it's sometimes the same. If you contact the editors ahead of time, you may not necessarily get a very good feedback, which sometimes could be frustrating.
That's a very good point, and that's the distinction between scholarly materials and sort of I don't mean to say fluffier, but non-scholarly stuff. Yeah, I think my suggestions on contacting the editors in regards to the scholarly things is good luck with that, because not much is going to happen in regards to that. And you might be violating some unwritten rules and that sort of thing, and then you'll, they hate you and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's an extremely good point, and thank you for pointing that out. Sort of middle ground, ooh, I'm really going over on this.
Yeah, Lana has a message to make, and then we have to move on.
Okay.
Oh, were there any other questions, any last minute questions before we move out to break?
Thank you. You were a wonderful group.
Thank you, Patrick. Stop by and see Vanessa at the AALL